Welcome to the STR Data Lab.
Hello and welcome to the STR Data Lab. I'm Jamie Lane, Chief Economist at ODNA, and I'm joined today again by my trusty co-host, Scott Sage. Scott, welcome to the show.
Great to see you again, Jamie. And by way of your background on camera, this looks to be your short-term rental in North Georgia mountains, huh?
Yeah, I'm up here in North Georgia, taking advantage of a week when the house wasn't booked and enrolled my son in a day camp up here. So working from the house, dropping him off at camp and having some, I wouldn't say fun up here yet, but we're going to have some fun this weekend.
You're getting to experience that 5-star stay that all your guests get.
Yeah. But the one thing I cannot get my brain around is every time I come up here, I cannot find a single thing in my kitchen. It feels like every guest feels the need to rearrange everything in the kitchen. And it's been 4 or 5 guests since I've been up here. So there is so much that has changed in this house, furniture in different spots. I could not find my desk chair. Everything
How far
has
did
been.
the desk chair move?
It was someone brought it into a separate bedroom. I had to go hunt for it.
Let me ask you this. Do you have labels on your cabinets and on kitchen items?
We have labels on all the light fixtures or on all the switches. I do not have labels on the cabinets, but it's more like there's multiple cabinets for glasses and sort of move things around and some you put the spatula, we have this great jar thing to put the spatulas in, but then people putting them in separate drawers, or I don't know. Maybe I just need to, yeah.
Look, sounds like a conversation to have with the cleaning staff too on the turnover process.
Yeah, no, that is fair. So how have you been? How's your summer treating you?
It's off to a good start. I'm got lots of travel coming up, going to a couple conferences. So IMN, STR Wealth, Hawaii 5-0 retreat. Going to be seeing a lot of our colleagues in the industry talking all things short-term rentals. So excited about the upcoming agenda and docket for the industry.
That's awesome.
All right, Jamie, should we jump in and talk about May performance? Lots to digest here.
I mean, that's why we're here, right?
Yes, I guess so. We could just talk about your property and all my travel. But all right, let's go. Let's try a new format here. Let's start with some headline stats. You can jump into anything that stands out to you, and then we have a couple topics on the back end, a little bit more meaty that we can discuss. So let's run through the waterfall of stats. So when we look at May, listings grew just shy of 6% year over year. We did see a 1% dip in occupancy. However, ADR did grow year over year by 6%, which contributed, despite the dip in occupancy, to a 4.8% year over year growth in RevPAR. Now, Jamie, we did see overall nights booked in May down 0.3%, but still down. So where do you want to start in that waterfall of data?
Yeah. So, and we can sort of maybe dig into the nights book number because it is worrying, to say the least, that we see fewer nights being booked during the month of May that compared to last year. And it aligns some with demand. We saw demand up 4.5%. So we have this sort of notion of nights booked lower, but actual stays up. So how can that be? And essentially what we're seeing is shorter lead times across the board. And we're now getting into this period of a lot of summer travel was booked. A lot of summer travel gets booked sort of last minute as people are looking to do those stays. So we're really seeing a timing issue of when people were actually booking their summer travel. And it's been playing out in the pacing data too, in terms of when you look at forward pacing, things look really weak, and they have looked weak for the summer travel. And then as we get closer and closer to those actual dates, we see bookings sort of pick up. So May is sort of the last month of like not summer. And then we get into June, July, and we're sitting here now in June talking about May. But we really have seen sort of bookings begin to pick up for in the month for the month. And but not really for bookings in this month for like July, August, September. So it's this really difficult, like to plan for phenomenon that we're seeing as the booking lead time shorten because it's really changing, the overall booking pattern. So, and what's good here is that demand was up 4.5%. So if we were seeing demand even lower, 2, 3, 4%, or less than 4%, like that would be causing an 2, 3, 4% declines in overall occupancy. So I still feel relatively good about only a 1% decline in overall occupancy. When we look at how June is sort of pacing, and we're almost now done with June at the time of this recording, we're also down about 1% overall in occupancy. And when we were talking this time last year, we were saying occupancy was pacing in June down about 2 to 3%.
That's a really important point. Like that reinforces what you just said about this shorter booking windows. And like, hey, nights booked are down right now, but what the trend is showing over really the past 4 to 5 months is the bookings are coming, they're just coming later. And we already see that compression in June, as you just said. We closed the gap from 2.5% to 1%.
Right. But what that means though too is, and we don't have that sort of on the books sort of and almost guarantee that people are actually going to stay, where any now sort of big global event could derail this. And it does feel like every week we have another sort of global event that could potentially sort of derail things.
You're right. I mean, the saving grace is if you're panicked now, bookings are coming in later. So like, don't panic maybe as much. But like what this tactically means is if you're an individual host and you're looking at your bookings calendar, understand this new trend and what we're starting to move into a new normal of bookings are coming in later. So as you think about your pricing strategy, as you think about your midnight stay strategy, adapt to what you're seeing in the data. And then if you're a manager managing on behalf of a homeowner or a client, having those conversations with the homeowner, maybe clip this of what Jamie just said about what we see in the data, that this is a trend. And so it's not cause for alarm and panic, especially if you still are getting those bookings. I think it's a different conversation if those bookings don't ever arrive. But if they're showing up later, the calendars look empty longer, that is happening at the macro level. Obviously, go into your own market, do the research, but at the macro level, that is the trend we are seeing over the past quarter and change.
Yep. And the other sort of measures, so that we're looking at besides sort of just bookings, and we're monitoring and what's happening in the economy, and are we still adding jobs? Is the unemployment rate coming up or not? What's happening in terms of other sort of forms of consumer spending, other forms of travel? And broadly, we still see everything sort of holding up. So it's not like this real cause for concern right now. Like if we would see nights booked down and at the same time see really weakening economic data, like that should correlate during a downturn, and that would make me feel less good. But last month we added 139,000 jobs, like unemployment staying steady at 4.2%, and we're still seeing inflation not yet reflecting any sort of data around tariffs. Like it does look like people or importers had sort of front loaded a lot of goods so that they not yet having to pass on those cost increases to consumers. Consumer confidence actually increased in May. And I think consumers are starting.
Single month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Largest single month gain in 4 years, right?
Yeah. So and it does sort of correlate with and us pausing the tariffs. So consumers are feeling like it's more a negotiation tactic than that we're actually going to see a major increase in the tariffs. So yeah, I think consumers are feeling a little bit better and coming into summer. We're still watching gas prices and oil prices. Like we saw a bit of a scare after the bombing started between Israel and Iran. And one of the quickest things that could derail demand, especially as we get into summer travel, is if we got into some sort of oil price shock. So and immediately after the bombings, we saw oil prices tick up about 10%. But when we look overall at where oil prices are, where gas prices are, like this is in prime time to support like a great summer travel season. Gas prices are not a concern, but that is one area that I would be watching very closely and keeping an eye on if any of this sort of escalates. And we have, I think we're still in sort of a ceasefire with that. Um, we haven't, as far as I understand, fully closed the Strait of Hormuz, which could also sort of have an impact on gas prices. So if you're sort of looking for and the sort of direct correlation there between and how Israel and Iran and getting into a war could directly impact your bookings for short-term rentals, like it's through the oil. And we've seen that time and time again when conflict happened in the Middle East, especially if they start bombing oil fields. That has not been the case right now, but any sort of contraction in overall supply could absolutely have an impact.
Gas prices go up, oil goes up, constrains travel, and that, especially in the backdrop of May, we saw drive to leisure markets outperform the average and the rest of the industry, which signals that strong demand for holiday weekends. Jamie, you're saying that could change in a world where we see a spike in oil prices.
Yeah, and there's obviously much more direct impact in markets in the Middle East. We've seen major increases in cancellations for bookings throughout Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, like areas that are directly impacted and from this conflict, where and Israel's seen the second largest number of cancellations in 3 years, just over the past week. Like it's been had a major impact on that market. So, yeah, definitely not expected here, but you can clearly see the direct impact of from war that it has, and in a lot of ways, and it could also impact Americans from traveling to Europe, especially to other in areas in the Middle East. Like we've seen Middle East travel, so Americans going to the Middle East being some of the most fastest growing types of travel, like Dubai, UAE, even into Saudi Arabia, Europe, Egypt, has seen really strong demand over the past couple of years. And now, like with sort of conflict there, like you see people pulling back, and maybe they stay domestic, or maybe they travel to Europe instead.
Typically, where do you see that traveler displaced towards? Is it another, let's say a US origin traveler, do they stay domestic or go to other parts of the globe?
Usually, if they're going to take a trip overseas, they're taking a trip overseas. We don't typically see that stay domestic. When we were looking at like after the start of the war in Ukraine, we definitely saw a decrease in travel to parts of Eastern Europe, and we saw a subsequent increase in travel in other parts of Europe. So yeah, it is displaced travel, but not necessarily always a net benefit for the U.S.
Okay. So lots of potential and uncertainty as context for bookings going forward the second half of the year. Give us one key indicator, one key data point you're seeing as we think about summer pacing and the data you're looking at July onward.
Yeah, so July onward, and as you would expect, given my sort of tee up when we were talking about June, and then in May and sort of what's actually playing out. And I'm going to break this into location types because it does vary dramatically by location type. If we're looking at coastal markets, like this is where pacing looks the most healthy. Overall occupancy July and August is only down about 0.5% compared to last year. We get a lot of last minute bookings. Like I expect occupancy to be positive this summer in those coastal markets. Mountain lake markets, so think like Adirondacks, Lake Tahoe, all the sort of great summer destinations. Pacing's down on average July and August about 2%. I do expect that probably to get flat and sort of on par with prior years. Small and mid-sized cities, pacing's down about 4 or 5%. Those are the areas that we're still seeing pretty strong overall supply growth. And we do expect occupancy to probably come in lower in those areas. We saw occupancy down and roughly 1.5% in May. So it wouldn't surprise me to see occupancy continue to be down 1.5%, 2% in those small and mid-sized city areas. And then my biggest concern is in the large cities, urban and suburban. We're seeing summer pacing right now down about 6% in suburban and about 8% in urban areas. Those are the areas typically with the shortest lead times. So when we think about typical urban booking lead times, it's about 38 days. So, and July and August, 38 days. Looking at data as of the beginning of June, like there's a lot of booking still left to happen, even if we look at sort of normal times. And given the shortened booking lead times, like it's probably a whole lot coming in the last week or two up until those stay dates. So, and it is going to be touch and go. Urban areas are the ones that we talked about in the past most exposed to international travel. And we haven't talked about that yet, but we are seeing a real mixed bag in terms of international guests coming to the US. Canadians still continuing to choose other destinations. So we saw stays in the US by Canadians decelerate even further. So we talked last month that stays by Canadians in the US were down about 15% year over year, roughly on par with March. In May, that came down to minus 28%. And when we look at the data that the Canadian government puts out, they told us that Canadian trips to the US by air were down 24% in May, and trips by land were down 35%. And that all of those had really pulled back even further from April to May. So this is absolutely impacting hosts and Canadians are sort of traveling to. We're also seeing declines in trips from Germans, guests from New Zealand, the Netherlands, France, all seeing sort of a pullback in the past few months. And that's all, it's hard to put any sort of positive spin on that. But if we go and look at countries, there are quite a few countries we're actually seeing increases from guests coming to the US. It's just not nearly enough to offset the impact that Canada has, since it is the number one sort of country for inbound guests. But we are seeing increases in guests from Argentina, Israel, Italy, Australia, South Korea, Brazil, Japan, India, UK, all traveling to US at a greater rate than last year.
Good stuff. Thanks, Jamie. Let's wrap with some interesting data you just pulled around review scores by operator size. So I will orient us to the data we're looking at. And if you want the data cut, reach out to Jamie or myself on LinkedIn, and we'll send you this data directly. But when we look at this, so Jamie, we did a similar analysis about a year ago. But when we look at June 2025, the average Airbnb review scores by host size. So we have 6 cuts here. 1 unit if you manage 1 unit. If you have 2 to 5, 6 to 20, 2099, 100 to 499, and 500 plus. So you can segment these cohorts by how many properties they're managing. And maybe not surprising is as you scale, or the more units you have under management, the worse your review score is. So if we look at 1 unit operators, for example, they are approaching 497, 498, whereas all the way on the other end of the spectrum, 500 plus, they're about 476, 477. So like there's a pretty steep curve, and it holds true across all categories. We then looked at this year over year change. And the good news here for large operators is that across all categories of accuracy, cleanliness, check-in, communication, value, and overall, the large operators saw the greatest year over year change in review scores. So lots to dissect here, but if you had to underwrite what was driving this change for large operators, what do you think that is?
You want it my optimistic answer or my real answer?
I want your optimistic answer first. I like optimistic
Yeah.
Jamie better.
My optimistic answer is that, and people are paying attention to it. They're sort of understanding the value of review scores. The technology to sort of manage their listings is getting more and more advanced. Like AI messaging is getting better, and their ability to scale and actually do a lot of these things is absolutely getting better, and we're seeing that in terms of the review scores.
What's your real answer?
That really over the past 2 years, Airbnb has been on a big kick to get rid of the lowest performing properties. They've publicly stated that they removed 400,000 properties on the platform that are underperforming primarily in terms of reviews. Like they're consistently getting bad reviews, and Airbnb is going to give you a 1 strike you're out or 2 strikes you're out sort of warning, and that they're getting rid of them. And that's, and essentially we're taking 2 snapshots of like all the listings that were available in May of 2024, all the listings that were available in May of 2025, and looking at sort of the average review scores and sort of the overall changes. And just quality of listings on Airbnb is getting better. And it's a mix of new listings that are coming on, and you're maybe getting some more professional, better sort of operators. And then, yeah, you're and removing out some of the worst ones, the worst offenders in terms of guest satisfaction. What do you think it is?
I think it's both. Your real answer is real. That is no getting around that. Is like, this is just pure data, and Airbnb is doing a lot of work to cull the poor performing listings off their platform. No doubt. I also do know operators are paying attention to this. They're taking more care. They're being intentional. They understand the value of good reviews, and therefore in taking intentional effort. I think there's a third lever that is not nearly to the degree that the first two are. I think it's a much smaller lever, but we are seeing consolidation in the industry. And so you're seeing some consolidation of both professional managers and co-hosts who are high quality operators taking more listings on. So naturally that number of scaled operators grows. And if they are taking on high quality units and improving the operations, then that data will look better year over year. So while I do not think that is the primary explainer, I think it is a trend we are seeing in the market today.
Yeah, and I could absolutely see that too. And I think it's going to be a fun one to sort of track. Maybe for next month, I'll do another cut of the data for you, Scott, where it sort of controls for, and you had to be both operating this year and last year, so we could see the real change in operators that were sort of available in both periods. I'll have the team pull that, and we can see what the real impact is of Airbnb removing listings and whether that was the full effect.
And you know what? You know what's great, Jamie, is you don't have to be Jamie Lane or AirDNA to cut that data, because if you use AirDNA, you can connect your listing read only and go see your review score compared to your market, compared to other operators, compared to your submarket or custom comp set, and see how you're performing over time as well. So that's my plug as we wrap up here. Jamie, any final thoughts here as you enter the second half of 2025?
Yeah, and next month we're going to be talking more and more about our sort of summer outlook report, our mid-year outlook report. So I'll sort of save some of the opining on the economy to then. But it is, um, and there's a lot of moving parts in terms of an overall economic growth. We are seeing a clear slowdown in terms of overall job growth. We're seeing, um, I wouldn't say flashers of recession, but and odds of recession are still very elevated. We've got to be very vigilant in terms of looking for signs of sort of weakness in booking windows, and what that means, weakness in terms of pacing and what that means. And I would just recommend to everyone, and especially as we get into peak season, like we're in peak season now, got to be monitoring all of your properties in terms of how those last minute bookings are coming in, if they're coming in. Got to be monitoring your competition in terms of how their bookings are coming in, what rates they're able to get, and what are the types of properties people are booking versus not. And we're still seeing further and further weakness on the budget side compared to the luxury end. So yes, we talked a lot about broad trends today, but like none of these broad trends are going to like hold at your local market level. So really just encouraging people to dig in and sort of putting your head in the sand, sort of, and hoping that bookings are going to come in just because we're saying a lot of last minute ones isn't a strategy.
Well said. That is not the strategy I would recommend anybody deploy. But as always, Jamie, thank you for the data. Thank you for the research. See you next month for the outlook.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott.